Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might brighten your day. The room fell silent as Alistair Kane slammed the forged medical report onto the boardroom table. His chest heaved, not from the illness they claimed was killing him, but from the rage of betrayal burning in his veins. Around him, men in expensive suits froze, shocked to see the billionaire CEO, once thought untouchable, expose his own family's deception in front of the world. His voice cut through the air like a blade. You tried to bury me with lies, but tonight the truth rises with me. At that moment, the powerful were no longer in control. Justice, love, and the will to fight for the forgotten had just taken center stage. A cold rain was pouring down over Harbor City, the emerging financial capital of the East Coast. Alistair Kane, the youngest CEO in the history of Skyline Holdings, had just emerged from a shareholder meeting when dizziness struck him like a cold knife across his temples. The glass lobby glinted, leather shoes echoed, people moved aside for him as usual, a man rich enough to buy a rainy day's scenery. But today, his wealth couldn't buy him a normal breath. In a private practice near the docks, Dr. Harrow closed the file with a look of half-communicating, half-compassionate concern. You have irreversible myocardial degeneration, rapidly progressing. Get your life back in order. The words fell like a stone into a well, echoing in his ribs. Alistair, who had always calculated every possible risk, suddenly lost his sense of self. On the way back to the headquarters, his assistant Mira advised him to postpone his evening schedule, a fundraising gala for the Sale Fund, which supports disadvantaged youth. He shook his head. What scared him most was the empty room and the racing thoughts. At least between the yellow lights and soft music, he could temporarily play the role of the untouchable man. The dinner was held in the glass lobby on the 42nd floor, where businessmen clinked glasses and laughed. Ronan Kane, Alistair's half-brother, a polite smile with a calculating eye, touched his shoulder. Brother, you look different. It's not because the Northport deal is delayed, is it? Alistair smiled, pushing the suspicions back into the background. Ronan was ambitious, and the way he warmed to numbers always made people forget the knife hidden in the rose. During rush hour, a small accident occurred. The wine tray slipped from the hands of a waitress. Lan Kai and red wine splashed onto Alistair's white shirt like a fresh wound. Dressed casually, her hair tied up awkwardly, she apologized in a fluster, quickly using a tissue. Several customers burst out laughing. One muttered, "Places like this aren't for them." Alistair unconsciously held her hand, his voice low and warm. "It's okay, it's just a shirt." That touch was as brief as an alarm. In Lan Kai's eyes, there was something he rarely saw in his world, dignity, something that didn't need money to guarantee. After the incident, the manager wanted to fire her immediately to save face. Alistair said, "No one loses their job because of an accident." He accepted the thin raincoat she handed him. The smell of cheap soap and the salty breeze of the harbor wafted by, strangely making his mind calm. Late at night, Alistair went out into the city. The rain was still persistent. At the 24/7 diner on the corner of Bay and Linden, he saw Lan Kai changing into an apron, washing cups, and studying for someone in her crumpled notebook. It turned out she worked 2 jobs, a diner during the day and an event server at night, to support Bao, her 16-year-old brother who was passionate about marine engineering. Storms spare no one, but the one with the stronger oar can swim longer. "You saved me tonight," Alistair said, half joking, saved a speech from becoming too arrogant. She chuckled, calling it work. His thank you sounded sincere for the first time. And so, a man from the clouds and a girl from the water's edge sat by the fogged-up window. Their story began with a kind awkwardness. As Alistair left, he left a business card. Skyline, Blue Tide Research Institute, a little-known internal fellowship program. If Bao likes it, bring his sister to try out the lab this weekend. That night, the glass-fronted apartment overlooking the harbor was no longer so quiet. In the darkness, Alistair reached into his pocket. Harrow's folded diagnosis was still there, like an uninvited whisper, out of time. He opened his computer and created a file called Legacy, not to carve a name into a building, but to keep people from falling over the water's edge just because they were born on the less-lit side of town. Elsewhere, Lan Kai turned off the lights in the shop, put on a cheap raincoat, and led Bao back to the room overlooking the narrow alley. "They won't trust us easily," she said, "but we can trust each other." Bao nodded, pointing out the window. At that moment, a patrol boat passed by, its lights sweeping across like chalk on a blackboard. Sometimes the sea writes its own message. The next morning, Alistair sat across from Mira and the head of legal. He asked for a permanent scholarship fund and an apprenticeship in an old warehouse on the docks. Legal asked, "Why not name it after you? Name the person who works there," he said. Then he added, "And arrange a meeting with the doctor. I want to compare raw data." Mira tilted her head. "You don't believe in Harrow," Alistair replied. "I believe in the numbers, but I want to see a way to get there." At the end of the day, Ronan stopped by the office and patted him on the shoulder. "Bro, I heard you're opening a workshop for the kids in the East End. Good for the brand. Shareholders will love it." His smile was like artificial flower beds, pretty, without scent. Alistair suddenly felt the line between goodwill and PR was as thin as blotting paper. That evening, the rain stopped. Alistair returned to the diner on the corner of Bay and Linden. Lan Kai had just finished her shift, and Bao was holding a model of a tidal turbine made from recycled plastic. He talked about how to convert current into electricity, the light in his eyes shimmering like a reflection of water. Alistair listened, feeling his heart, which had been condemned by medicine, beat to a different rhythm, the rhythm of hope. He promised, "Next Saturday, come to the E9 warehouse. I will open the apprentice workshop." Lan Kai paused a bit. "We have nothing to repay." Alistair replied, "Keep your self-respect. It is more valuable than any invoice." He said that sentence to her and perhaps to himself. At night, when Lan Kai locked the door of the restaurant, she saw a black limousine parked not far away. The window rolled down Veronica Kane, a woman in a dark velvet dress, her eyes as sharp as needles. "Are you the waitress who ruined last night's party?" Lan Kai straightened her back. "I stained my shirt, but the party wasn't ruined." Veronica laughed. "Self-esteem is cheap but strong. Tell the person who protected you that Kane's doesn't keep rats." The car drove away, leaving behind a cold scent of perfume. Lan Kai didn't understand why someone's mother would come all the way here and say such things. But she also understood. If pride had a form, it would look exactly like that car. In the glass apartment, Alistair opened the backup server. The degenerated ECG data Harrow had sent him yesterday, there were strange, cyclical noises. He sent a request to retrieve the logs from the device. Science doesn't hate people, it just hates sloppiness. The rain stopped, the night wind carried the smell of salt. On the table, the Blue Tide Institute business card was placed next to the diagnosis. One side was the end point, the other the beginning point. Some say life is a straight line, but for Alistair, it was the tide line. Going down to know there is still a shore, going up to know the shore can change shape. On Saturday morning, Warehouse E9, an abandoned warehouse by the harbor, was transformed into a makeshift workshop. Old wooden tables, shelves of tools, a whiteboard that read, "We're going to make electricity from water." Bao and a few other young people from the east were excited. Lan Kai stood by the door, holding an old thermos. She didn't want to take up space, anywhere she didn't belong, but her eyes followed every weld. Alistair, sans suit, just a t-shirt and gloves, shows the kids how to read flow charts. He tells of how, when he was a kid living in a cheap apartment near the docks, his father, a ship captain, taught him to read the wind before he could read words. Nobody gives you a grade for reading the wind, but it saves lives. The kids laugh. Bao lights up. It's probably the first time he's heard a billionaire talk about listening to water like listening to music. At noon, a group of uninvited guests appeared, reporters and Ronan. He smiled like a friendly brother. Great! Community spirit is a priority at Skyline. The camera panned. Alistair unconsciously stood in front of the children, not letting the lens turn, studying into image campaign. He whispered to Ronan, "They come here to learn, not to be a background." Ronan shrugged. In this day and age, without images, goodwill will disappear. In the afternoon, Lan Kai brought homemade pâté bread. Alistair took a bite, suddenly remembering the smell of the old kitchen his mother used to cook in. He said thank you. Lan Kai replied, "Don't let anyone capture the way you are good. Let it spread by word of mouth." He nodded. It was a simple equation that many people forget. After the lecture, Alistair received an automated email from the medical device system. The original data log did not match the version Dr. Harrow had provided. There was evidence of overlay, an algorithm that distorts the signal. He forwarded it to Mira. "Need an independent review." Mira responded, "I have someone, Dr. Pytel, who often argues with data when it is not convincing." That night, Alistair met Veronica at her home. The dining table was as long as a runway. The chairs were carved with cold patterns. "You're going to turn your father's empire into a trade school." She sipped her wine, looked straight at him. "People like that dishwasher don't belong on the 42nd floor." Alistair said softly, "If there's no room for them on the 42nd floor, build a 43rd floor." Veronica set down her glass, the metal against glass clanging dryly. "And you think your heart, which is reportedly rotten, is strong enough to climb another floor?" That night, Alistair turned on the lights in E9 alone, listening to the waves. For 30 years he had climbed ladders with his head and hands. Now he might have to climb with his heart, which someone had said was broken. Near midnight, Ronan texted, "You should take the day off tomorrow. Let me handle the North Port." Alistair just stared at the word handle. People who were quick with that verb usually had a list of victims. The next morning, Dr. Patel looked at the data. "Your ECG signal is normal. There's noise injected. They've added a pattern that's misleading the machine learning. I need to see the device, the black box." Alistair felt like he was being pulled out of deep water. The disease wouldn't disappear overnight, but the truth could, if you dared to pull back the curtain. He called Mira, verify who introduced Harrow to the company. "Mira, a year ago CFO Lidon and Ronan supported a leadership-first medical contract. The pieces, like washed-up bottles, began to fit together. In the afternoon, Alistair went to the bay and Linden. Lan Kai was lecturing Bao about the lift of propellers underwater. Seeing him, she asked, "Is your heart okay?" For the first time, Alistair told a part of the truth, about the distorted data, about the doubt. Lan Kai paused. "I don't really understand, but if you need someone to go with you when you face it, I'll go." That simple sentence, not "I promise," just "I'll go with you," had patched up a tear in him. Late at night, the lights in the E9 workshop were off. But underneath, an old hatch was slightly open. Bao curiously followed the old pipes and discovered a technical tunnel connecting the E9 warehouse to the private dock, where Skyline moored its yachts. On the wall, the letters K Logistics were still painted faintly, a shell company that Ronan had owned before the transfer. Why was an apprentice workshop connected to a private dock? The question was as big as the sea. On Monday morning, Alistair called a closed-door meeting. He talked about the workshop as a CSR plan. Lidon nodded, Ronan applauded, but his eyes were like someone who had already bought the phrase. Alistair paused and then dropped the bait. I'll re-audit all the medical contracts and the port operations to optimize. Lidon paused. Ronan blinked. There was a 2-second silence, long enough to know there was a crack. That night, Veronica called. If you argue about the house, you will lose it. Alistair looked out the window, where the harbor lights were flashing. Mom didn't build it, Dad and the dock workers did. I just paid them back. On the other end of the line, the silence of someone used to winning and losing, not used to hearing gratitude. At the same time, Lan Kai returned to her rented room and met 2 strangers standing under the porch, asking questions about Alistair, about relationships, about E9. She gently but firmly said, I know little. If you need to know anything else, ask him. They left, leaving behind the pungent smell of tobacco. From now on, kindness is no longer a thin raincoat, it needs armor. Late that night, Bao handed Alistair a rough sketch of the tunnel. I think something's coming through here, not wind. Alistair looked at the arrows Bao drew. Cargo, equipment, maybe data. A possibility flashed through his mind. If the disease was fake, the harbor might be real. An escape route for something that didn't want to be seen. Alistair turned on his computer and emailed Dr. Patel, asking for confirmation of the tampered data. He had no idea how the people who didn't like the light would react to this email. All he knew was that facing the truth was always cheaper than paying for a lie. Offshore, the fishing boat's headlights flashed by, casting a streak of light onto the workshop's glass pane. In the small room, Lan Kai pulled the curtains, hugged the thermos, and thought about the phrase, you need someone to go with you. She whispered, okay, I'll go. 3 days later, Dr. Patel signed the report. No evidence of myocardial degeneration. Previous data set tampered with. At the same time, Mira sent another. Harrow received consulting money from K-Logistics before signing with Sky Line. K-Logistics, the name on the tunnel wall, resurfaced like a fish not afraid of water. Alistair came to Harrow without an army of lawyers, with only a map of data and a calm heart. Doctor, he said, I used to trust the data like the tide. It ebbs and flows, but it doesn't betray. You make it betray. Harrow gasped, then promised to adjust. Alistair put the tape recorder down on the table. You should adjust your conscience. The rest, leave it to the ethics committee. The news leaked to the local news network, but the article was pulled within hours. That kind of disappearance is only possible with wired things. That same evening, Ronan called. Bro, you're breaking a mirror. Shareholders don't like scandals. Alistair replied, a broken mirror is replaced by a mirror. A broken heart, can you replace it? There was a pause on the other end of the line. The void spoke louder than the speaker. At the E9 workshop, Bao and his friend set up flow sensors in the engineering tunnel. The data showed a stream of objects moving at night, not water. The tunnel operator used the lull of the tide to push the cargo. Bao exclaimed, it's not accidental. Lan Kai looked at Alistair. If you need to call the police. Alistair shook his head. We need evidence that no one can bend. That evening, the E9 workshop held a small sharing session. The children talked about their dreams. To be engineers, to be sailors, to be people who didn't have to apologize for being poor. Alistair looked at Lan Kai in the crowd and realized what he had been missing, a community that couldn't be bought with stocks. He caught Veronica's eyes at the door. She came silently, looked for a moment, then left, leaving on the table a large check for the fund. It turned out that maternal love has many languages. Some speak with compulsion, others speak with a trembling pen. Late at night, Mira sent a message. I have a warrant to search the medical equipment and dock operation log, tomorrow at 8 a.m. Alistair smiled and thanked her. He texted Lan Kai, tomorrow will be a long day. She replied, then I will have a longer breakfast. A small joke that changed the tone. The next morning, the investigation team entered the medical center to collect the equipment. At the private port, the maintenance staff was in a hurry. Ronan appeared, his smile as straight as a mast. Checking safety. Good. Mira lightly pointed to a point in the book. Why is there a ghost shift at 3 a.m.? No ships have entered. The manager was confused. Ronan's eyes were slightly blurred. A person who knows how to swim will rarely show waves unless there is a whirlpool. That night, Bao-S sensors went off. The tunnel was active. Alistair, Lan Kai, and Bao followed them to the intersection. The sound of carts, the sound of locks, they held their breath. A crate labeled medical equipment drifted on the manual rails. Bao whispered, "This is how." But before he could finish, a flashlight swept back. A figure shouted, "Who is it?" Lan Kai pulled Bao to the wall. Alistair stood up, his voice calm. "Alistair Kane. I'll go check for safety." The quiet moment before the storm. The figure retreated and made a phone call. 5 minutes later, Ronan appeared, wearing a long coat and smiling lightly. "I'm always curious." Alistair answered without hesitation. "Medical equipment at 3 a.m. through an unregistered tunnel." Ronan shrugged. "That's supply chain optimization." Lan Kai spoke, straightforward and soft. "Optimization is doing it according to regulations, not doing it when others are sleeping." Ronan looked at her, his eyes unreadable. The next morning, Dr. Patel presented his report to the ethics committee. The press couldn't get it out this time. The keyword medical data manipulation topped local headlines. Harrow was suspended. CFO Lidon explained. Veronica called Alistair. "I'll stand behind you." He replied, "I don't need someone behind me, I need someone beside me." It made her speechless, like hearing a son choose companionship over patronage. In the afternoon, Sky Line held an emergency meeting. Alistair proposed, "Terminate the contract with the related supplier K Logistics. Independently audit the port. Publicly announce the progress of CSR E9 workshop as a long-term program." Many people objected. Ronan asked for a postponement for the sake of the market. Alistair looked around the room and asked, "Do we want to be a company for the rankings or a company for the people?" That question had no answer in Excel, but it was imprinted on the eyes of some people. At night, Alistair returned to the E9 workshop. Lan Kai was wiping the table. Bao was drawing more propeller blades. Alistair said softly, "Thank you for coming along." Lan Kai looked at him. "We are just normal good people, Mr. Kane. Normal people do the right thing, then abnormal people will be confused." He laughed, for the first time feeling strong without having to pretend. But the tide had not yet turned. Mira sent an urgent message. "I have detected an unusual authorization on the CEO's account. Someone is trying to sign over the port assets." The phone screen reflected Alistair's eyes. The old rain streak seemed to return. In the distance, a ship's horn sounded, a sign of an involuntary departure if he stood still. Alistair looked up at the ceiling of the workshop, taking a deep breath. He was no longer the man who was intimidated by the words, "I'm going to die." He was the man who was changing the meaning of the words. Dying, the things that were no longer practical, no longer decent. The rest, living. The morning after Mira's message, the sky over Harbor City was as gray as carbon paper. Alistair walked into the 42nd floor conference room, where the glass walls looked straight out over the harbor. On the table, the asset optimization document was open. In the right corner was the power of attorney to transfer the private terminal to an anonymous fund in a distant archipelago. CFO Lidon held a pen, his mouth saying temporary, but his eyes saying permanent. Ronan leaned back in his chair, smiling modestly. "There is no signature from me," Alistair said, his voice as calm as water before the wind. All the authorizations from the CEO account last night were fake. The system logs recorded the IP address of the manipulator. A thin cough. Ronan raised his eyebrows in surprise. Last night, I was home. Mira placed a USB on the table. The internal system shows access from the vice president's spare office. That door opens with a single key card, yours, Ronan. The wind beat against the glass walls, making them tremble slightly. Veronica sat at the head of the table, her eyes sweeping over her two sons. Who's using their home as a hiding place? She asked, then turned to Lidon. Put your pen away. Lidon lowered his pen, looking like he'd dropped his shield. Alistair did not attack. He spread out the documents and spoke slowly. I propose two things: a forensic audit of all transactions through K-Logistics and an open internal hearing schedule. Invite the press, invite representatives of the port community. Ronan smiled faintly. You want to turn the company into a stage? Alistair replied. If the backstage is dirty, going on stage is the only way to clean it. At noon at the E9 workshop, the children drew a detailed map of the tunnel. They adjusted the sensors and combined the data streams into a graph. Lankai set out bread and hot soup. News of the hearing spread, and the small boat owners whispered to each other. There are rich people who want to hear what the poor have to say. It was rare, but not impossible. In the afternoon, Dr. Patel sent a formal letter to the ethics committee, outlining imprints of algorithmic manipulation in Alistair's medical records. Harrow was silent, his lawyer was talkative, but each word weighed like lead. A nurse practitioner privately sent Mira a message. She had been asked to select a noisy heart sample for testing. The first witness appeared. Night fell, and the harbor was lit up in yellow. The open hearing was held right on the wooden pier where the waves lapped rhythmically. A simple microphone stand, skyline ribbons fluttered, and folding chairs were filled with people, shareholders, reporters, and fishermen. Veronica arrived late in a dark coat, clutching a torn check. She sat in the front row, not speaking, but not leaving a rare sign of a heart learning to listen again. There are two things we have taken for granted, truth and people, Alistair began. Tonight we begin to repay our debt. He invited Dr. Patel to speak. The words sampling and distortion rang out, carried away by the sea breeze, but the meaning remained. Harrow stood a few meters away, his forehead beaded with sweat. His lawyer asked for a stoppage, but no one else agreed. It was Bao's turn. The 16-year-old boy in a wool cap, holding a model of the tunnel and a homemade sensor, his voice trembling but clear. The tunnel connecting E9 to the private terminal has undeclared nighttime cargo traffic. The data here. The old screen lit up. The graph showed unusual peaks at exactly 3 a.m. The audience murmured. A terminal worker stood up, pulled a tattered work card from his pocket. We were told not to record the maintenance night shift. I did, here. He pushed the notebook toward the microphone, a confession that was not loud but made people feel heavy on their shoulders. Ronan stepped up to the podium, his face still impassive. As soon as I knew there was a problem, I ordered an examination. We shouldn't be so quick to judge. He twisted his silver ring, a habit he had when he was calculating. As for the medical work, I believe it was all a mistake. A clean sentence, wiping the stain with a dry tissue. So the key card from last night? Mira asked, her voice low but sharp. Ronan laughed. My card was stolen. And the fingerprints on the door sensor, Alistair added, holding up the black and white photo, the fingerprints from the spare room's doorknob. There was a moment of silence as long as the tide was about to turn. At that moment, the customs whistle blew. From the far end of the dock, the port control team appeared. Captain Namus saluted briefly. In accordance with the request for coordination from Skyline and the port community, we are proceeding to seal the warehouse labeled K-Logistics. She raised her command. The human barrier parted like water as the train moved. Flashlights darted into the warehouse. Boxes of medical equipment were piled high. The red seal closed like a full stop. Ronan shrugged, stepped back, and made a call. Veronica stood up, taking the mic for the first time. "The Canes do not support abusers." Her voice was not warm, but clear. Then she turned to Alistair. Softly, "Mom, stand by." His face softened, not because he had won, but because a 43rd floor had just risen on the old roof. The media storm erupted overnight. The article was not retracted. Headlines included: "Corporation holds hearing on wharf. Medical records falsified. Ghost tunnel in Harbor City." Factory E9 suddenly became a top 5 keyword, not because of the scandal, but because of the clip of Bao explaining the strong tide. Water does not choose sides. It only chooses the path. It is people who choose right and wrong. 2 days later, the internal committee announced the interim results. Harrow was transferred to the city's medical ethics committee. Lidon was suspended. K Logistics was terminated from all contracts. The 4th terminal temporarily suspended overtime operations. Ronan left the office under the flash of cameras, no longer smiling. He passed by Lan Kai, who was handing out lunch boxes to the workers. "Did you win?" She shook her head. "In this terminal, only the living win. The rest is a lesson." At night, Alistair returned to his glass apartment. The files on his desk no longer threatened like rocks. They were just paper. Mira texted. The audit team found a chain of subsidiaries that ate into the port contract. The ultimate owner is the Ronan Foundation. The name sounds like Wanderer. Alistair smiled wryly. Wanderer, but very clingy. He looked down at the city. At the corner of Bay and Linden, the restaurant was still open late at night. Lan Kai stepped out, holding out her hand to catch the light rain. Saying something to Bao, the two sisters laughed. He texted, "Tomorrow, E9 will try the turbine model version 2, okay?" She replied, "Yes, and remember to have a long breakfast." The next morning, the test began. The V2 turbine was installed in a canal with a nice flow. Count 1-2-3, open the valve. The blades turned, the reflection like a steel flower. The indicator light turned green, enough voltage to light up the E9 sign. The group applauded. Alistair heard Lan Kai's laughter. His heart suddenly brightened. It turned out that life did not need a long speech, but the tide rarely stands still. In the afternoon, Ronan sent a letter requesting an extraordinary shareholders meeting, proposing to dismiss Alistair for damaging the image and hindering the financial strategy, along with the replacement plan, selling off non-core assets including E9. At the end of the letter, Ronan cited evidence that the CEO is not healthy enough to run the company. An old trap was set again, while the new bait was not yet dry. Alistair looked at the letter and sighed, not because he was tired, but because he felt sorry for his brother who kept choosing the slide over the stairs. He called Dr. Patel, "I need to make a health announcement to shareholders." Patel replied, "I'll be right there with you." He called Naima, "We need the results of the warehouse exam as soon as possible." "Naima, there's something you should see for yourself." At dusk, Alistair arrived at the sealed warehouse. Naima opened a box of medical equipment. Inside were heart rate monitors, but the firmware was tweaked to create false alarms if installed on a hospital server, a copy of the Harrow game. "If this thing gets out," Naima said, "it won't just be you who's going to get sick. The system will get sick." Alistair stiffened. What he thought was a personal knife tip turned out to be an industrial kitchen knife. That night, he wrote a speech for the shareholders' meeting. Not a justification, but a roadmap, cutting the rotten part, keeping the living part, turning E9 into a Blue Tide Academy, a long-term scholarship fund, transparent dock rules, an anonymous whistleblower line for workers. He titled it, "From Private Docks to the Common Good." Near midnight, the door to the E9 workshop opened softly. Veronica entered, her silver hair tied back. She walked around, touching the sign that was lit up by the turbines. "Your father wanted to be an apprentice, but he was too busy." She paused, her eyes moist but her voice still sharp. "Don't be as busy as your father." Alistair smiled, seeing his mother without her crown for the first time. She stood next to him, watching the blades spin steadily. "Tomorrow, I'll vote for you." Across town, Ronan was in a dark apartment lit only by the light of his monitor. He was looking at his impeachment presentation, twisting his silver ring. His phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number, a photo of Ronan standing in a tunnel, his hand on a shipping container. Below the photo were the words, "Water doesn't choose sides. People choose right and wrong." Ronan squinted, pressed redial. The line was busy. For the first time, he felt cold, even though the room was warm enough. Morning would come soon. The shareholders' meeting was waiting on the 42nd floor. Alistair closed the factory door and looked up at the E9 sign, lit by the currents of the very harbor that people despised as dirty. He suddenly understood. To keep this light, one had to dare to let it shine in the dark, even if one's own shadow was visible on the wall. He sent a message to Lan Kai, "Tomorrow, if you are free, sit in the front row." The reply came very quickly. "I will go with you," the sound of the tide lapping steadily, like someone patting the back of someone about to step into the light. Tomorrow, either the glass wall will shatter in a way that deserves to be broken, or it will turn into a mirror for the faces that deserve to see it. Harbor City morning was filled with rare sunlight. On the 42nd floor, the shareholders' meeting room was packed. Neat suits, ties smelled of money, press cameras buzzed. On stage, Alistair Kane stepped up, his face calm but his eyes brighter than ever. Below, Lan Kai and Bao sat in the guest seats, her hands clutching plastic cups of water as if holding onto a string. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alistair began, his voice booming through the microphone. "I was told I was no longer healthy. They were partly right. My heart was threatened, but not by disease, but by lies." He held up Dr. Patel's report. "Here are the independent results. No degenerative disease. Previous data tampered with. I am alive and there is work to be done." A murmur arose. Some shareholders nodded, others frowned. Ronan stood, smiling, but his voice was as hard as iron. "That's touching. But we don't invest on emotion. The truth is that Skyline has lost its credibility. The stock price is down. Projects are behind schedule. I'm suggesting that Alistair be removed and that the company be put in the hands of someone who isn't distracted by fantasy." Half the room applauded. Below, Veronica looked at her eldest son, her eyes like a compass. Then she slowly stood up. "I vote to keep Alistair. Not because he is my son, but because for the first time, I see a CEO standing here talking about the people, not just about dividends." The murmur changed direction, and a few pens began to write down votes. Alistair continued. "My plan, turn E9 into the Blue Tide Academy, training the children of the East. Seal all shady contracts with K Logistics. Set up a whistleblower line to protect workers. And to release all the financial data of the port. Anyone who supports transparency, vote for me." The electronic board blinked. The votes were rolling. 55% keep Alistair, 30% recall, 15% no. Applause rose like a tidal wave. Ronan clutched the silver ring, his eyes dark. But when the camera panned, he smiled like a gentleman. That same afternoon, the press exploded. "Shareholders keep CEO after medical scandal and secret tunnel." The clip of Bao presenting data went viral, and he was called the boy who taught the entire corporation how to read the tide. The restaurant at the corner of Bay and Linden was packed with customers wanting to meet the two sisters. Lan Kai smiled and shyly said, "We are just ordinary people," but in her heart, she knew they had just entered another world where the eyes were no longer contemptuous but admiring. At night, Alistair returned to the glass apartment. He thought he would be safe, but the hallway was dark. The sensor lights were not on. Footsteps echoed, and then a figure blocked the way. Ronan stood there, his voice low. "You won with tears and drama, but every drama has an end." He held out a USB. "There is a recording inside. Are you going to use it against me? If you release it, the shareholders will be scared, the company will fall, and your brother will take you down with him." Alistair looked straight. "The truth is not a weapon, it is light. You are only afraid of light." Ronan curled his lips. "Then you should be careful. Light can also burn." Before leaving, Ronan leaned close to his ear. "Do you know who gave me the photo in the tunnel? Not the staff, not the press. Someone very close to you." The words were left unfinished like a knife, making Alistair stand still in the hallway, suddenly doubting even the familiar glass walls. The next day, Naima from the port control team called urgently. "We found a new warehouse that was not sealed. Signs of midnight shipment. You need to see it." Alistair rushed over, bringing Mira with him. Inside the warehouse, they opened the box. Not medical equipment, but monitoring components, small chips that could be implanted into the system to create data illusions. "This is what makes you believe you're dying," Mira whispered. Naima nodded. "And it can make the entire city's health system see a patient who doesn't exist and then spend money on it." The waves crashed against the warehouse walls, roaring. Alistair sighed. "So it's not just me, but thousands of people who could be turned into victims of the fake number." That night in the E9 workshop, the lights were still on. Bao was busy assembling the V3 turbine. Lan Kai made ginger tea and placed it in front of Alistair. "Drink it if you're tired. We still have a lot of work to do." He smiled. "I thought I was the one who saved you. It turns out it was you and Bao who saved me from the belief that only power can win." She shook her head. "We just do kind things. Kindness is sometimes weak, but it lasts longer than lies." Alistair watched as the small current from the turbine lit up the yellow bulb. In that light, Lan Kai's face was warmer than at any party. For the first time, he felt like he didn't just want to fight Ronan or keep the company, but wanted to keep the precious normalcy right in front of him. But the phone rang, breaking the moment. Mira's voice was trembling. "Alistair, we just lost someone. Dr. Pytel was in a car accident, very strange, and the investigation data was deleted from the city's servers." The air in the workshop froze. Bao put down the screwdriver. Lan Kai put her hands on the table and whispered, "They don't want the truth to survive." Alistair clenched his ginger teacup. The yellow light of E9 was now a beacon in his eyes. "If they want darkness, we must make the light stronger." Outside, the tide was rising. The city glittered, but beneath the light an undercurrent was stirring. The news of Dr. Pytel's death spread like wildfire. The papers reported it as car crash on a highway bridge, but anyone who had worked in the investigation knew it was too neat to be accidental. Mira clenched her fists and said, "If Patel is gone, they'll say you're lying. And if the data has been deleted from the city's servers, we've lost all evidence." Alistair was silent for a moment. His mind flashed to the hospital bed, where a script had been set up to make him dying. But then his eyes caught the yellow light in the E9 workshop, still lit by Bao's small turbine. "The evidence isn't just in the servers," he said softly. "The evidence is in the real person, and we're going to show the whole city." That night, Alistair held a public show at the docks. No party, no wine, just an open house. The E9 kids installed turbines, wired up the docks, turned them into a glowing ribbon of light. The Eastsiders poured in, workers carrying their shift notebooks, notes that had once been considered meaningless. Lan Kai stepped onto the makeshift stage, her hands shaking as she held the microphone. They say we are just poor people, but we saw the smuggled goods passing through the tunnel every night. This is a diary, handwritten, written by people no one ever asked. Dozens of notebooks were raised, like waves of hands in a sea of people. Bao pressed a button, and the sensor data pattern appeared on the big screen. The abnormal wave peaks matched perfectly with the ghost shift hours. People gasped. Reporters panned their cameras. There was no way to deny it when the real light was on. Just then, Ronan appeared, followed by his bodyguards. He clapped his hands slowly. It's touching, but this is just a show. The company needs strategy, not cheap theater. Alistair stepped forward, his voice low. Strategy cannot be built on lies. You used K-Logistics to deceive shareholders, to deceive me, and now you want to deceive the city. Ronan smirked. What evidence do you have other than some torn notebooks and school toys? Just then, a female voice rang out. Naima, the customs captain, stepped out with a sealed file. The evidence is here. The sealed package contained a medical data emulation chip. We decoded it. There was a digital signature from K-Logistics, and the final approval signature belonged to Ronan Kane. The crowd erupted. The cameras zoomed in. Ronan paled and turned away, but Veronica stood in his way. Her voice was cold and trembling. You are my son, but Kane does not hide his sins. Go, Ronan. The bodyguard hesitated, then backed away. In the flash of the camera, Ronan stepped onto the dock, his figure shrunk in the heavy silence. In the weeks that followed, Sky Line was restructured. Harrow and Lidon faced court. Ronan disappeared from every position. E9 officially became Blue Tide Academy with a fixed budget and an independent board. East Side children wore simple uniforms, smiling under the shed roof. During the opening ceremony, Alistair said succinctly, "A company doesn't survive on profits alone. It survives on beliefs, and beliefs start with these kids." Lan Kai stood next to him, smiling gently, her eyes filled with tears. Bao held up the new turbine model and shouted loudly, "Water flows, lights come on." The whole workshop cheered. Late at night, Alistair sat on the roof of the E9 warehouse, the salty sea breeze blowing. Lan Kai brought up 2 cups of ginger tea. He took them and asked softly, "Do you think we're taking it too far?" She shook her head. "No, just live right. We poor people only want that." He smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time. No more fear of death, no more specter of false numbers. Just a small but real golden light, the light that had saved him from despair one night. "Thanks for coming along," Alistair whispered. Lan Kai replied softly, "We still have a long way to go, but at least now you're not alone." In the sky, the moon appeared behind the clouds, reflecting on the sea. The tide rose steadily, carrying the light of E9's lamp far away, a reminder. Light may start from a small bulb, but it travels farther than any darkness. And the story ends, not with the collapse of ambition, but with a new beginning. Love is found, justice is revealed, and a once-forgotten community now has a place in the light. When I look back at this story, what strikes me most is how easily power and fear can cloud the truth, but also how courage and kindness can clear that fog. I've learned that wealth, status, and titles may impress people for a moment, but only honesty, compassion, and resilience can truly move hearts and leave a lasting mark. As a predecessor, I want to pass on this reminder. Never underestimate the quiet strength of doing what's right, even when the world tells you it's impossible. Because in the end, lies may shine for a while, but only truth can light the path forward. And now, I'd like to turn the question to you. Have you ever faced a moment where telling the truth cost you something, but gave you back your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your experience might be the spark that encourages someone else. If you find this story meaningful and want to help us share these important values, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Together, we can build a strong community full of potential and a spirit of justice.